The 12th arrow missed before Nora Hale reached the top of North Watch. She heard at first a hard hiss cutting across the cold morning, followed by nothing. No bell, no cheer, only the silence that had settled over Blackpine Gorge after 11 other failures. Nora stopped 2 steps below the parapet, a breakfast tray balanced against one hip. Frost silvered the stone beneath her boots. From there, she could see 12 Royal Marksmen lined along the firing platform, each carrying the same expression men wore when skill had stopped being enough. At the far side of the gorge, nearly lost in pale haze, a black iron bell hung beneath a timber frame. Nora could see it. She could also see why no one had hit it. Again. Commander Gideon Voss snapped. The 12th Marksman lowered his moonsteel warbow. Commander, I've already corrected 3 degrees east, and missed 3 degrees east. At the center of the platform stood Alpha King Rowan Blackridge. He wore no crown, only a dark riding coat, and the stillness of a man who did not need to prove he was in command. Voss turned toward him. My king, the gorge is unstable this morning. We should delay. Rowan kept his eyes on the distant bell. The conditions are the test. Voss fell silent. Nora should have kept walking. Tower runners did not stop to watch military assessments. Packless Omegas certainly did not correct them. So Nora told herself to move. She did not. A strip of red cloth tied to the firing rail fluttered east. That was what the marksmen were reading. They were reading the wrong wind. Nora's gaze moved beyond the platform. Snow dust lifted from the southern wall. The pines halfway across bent west, then shivered north. Far below, vapor rising from the frozen river twisted opposite the flag beside the archers. 3 currents. The men were correcting for one. Nora knew this gorge. For 6 winters she had crossed these towers carrying bread, medicines, lamp oil, and messages. She knew what Blackpine did before sunrise, and during the first minutes when sunlight warmed the southern rock. The Royal Marksmen were treating it like an open field. Voss lifted one hand. Assessment concluded. The words left Nora before caution could stop them. They're reading the wrong wind. The platform went still. Nora closed her eyes for half a second. Too late. Commander Voss turned toward the stairs. Who said that? Nora considered stepping backward. Instead, she climbed the final 2 steps. Every face turned toward her. She became painfully aware of her plain gray dress, worn boots, and the tray in her hands. 12 Royal Marksmen stared. Voss looked offended. Rowan only looked interested. Nora set the tray on the stone ledge. I did. Voss's eyes narrowed. Name, Nora Hale. Position, tower runner. Pack? She knew what would happen when she answered. Non. The word packless changed the air. Voss exhaled. Then take your tray where it belongs, and leave military assessment to people trained for it. Nora should have lowered her eyes. Instead, she looked toward the bell. The wind beside the bow is moving east, she said. Halfway across the gorge, it reverses along the north wall. The south face is warming now, so the air rises beneath the last part of the arrow's path. One marksman laughed. You can see all that from a kitchen stair, tower's stair. His smile disappeared. Voss stepped forward. Enough. Let her finish. Rowan had not raised his voice. He did not need to. Voss stopped. For the first time, the Alpha King looked directly at Nora. What else? Nora swallowed. The bell hangs lower than the firing platform. They're compensating for distance, but not the drop. And the cross current near the center is stronger than that ribbon shows. The youngest marksman frowned toward the trees. Another looked at the river vapor. Doubt entered the line. Voss saw it too. You expect me to believe a servant understands a moonsteel trajectory better than 12 crown-certified archers? No. Her answer came before fear. I expect you to check. For one dangerous second, Nora thought Voss might order her removed. Instead, Rowan looked toward the moonsteel warbow resting on the firing table, then back at her. Can you make the shot? Every instinct Nora had learned in 6 years of surviving quietly told her to say no. Then her left shoulder gave a dull, familiar ache beneath her cloak. A warning. A memory. She looked at the bell. She had not drawn a bow like that in years. Not since before she came to Blackridge. Not since she learned that some parts of a person were safer kept hidden. But she knew the gorge. She knew what the wind was doing. And she knew the 12 men below had failed for a reason she could correct. Rowan waited. He simply waited for the truth. Nora looked at the moonsteel bow, then at the king. Once. For a moment, no one moved. Nora's answer seemed to hang over the firing platform with the frost. Once, Commander Voss repeated, as if the word itself offended him. Nora kept her eyes on the moonsteel warbow. Up close, it looked worse than she had expected. The limbs were dark ash reinforced with narrow bands of silver-gray metal, the grip wrapped in black leather worn smooth by stronger hands. It was built for soldiers with heavier shoulders and longer reach, men who trained with it every morning, men who had not spent 6 years pretending they had forgotten how to shoot. Voss stepped between her and the weapon. My king, this is absurd. Rowan did not look at him. Why? She is untrained. You don't know that. She's a tower servant. Tower runner, Nora said. Voss turned sharply. Nora regretted correcting him almost immediately. Almost. One of the marksmen covered a smile. Voss ignored him. That bow can tear a shoulder out of place if mishandled. Nora's left shoulder pulsed beneath her cloak as if answering for him. I know. That changed something in Rowan's expression. Not suspicion. Attention. He glanced once at the way she held her left arm slightly closer to her body. You've used one before. Nora said nothing. Rowan did not press. Instead, he walked to the firing table and selected a single arrow. Voss stared at him. You're actually allowing this? 1 arrow. Rowan held it out to Nora. If she is wrong, we lose less than a minute. And if she is right? Rowan looked toward the distant bell. Then we've been measuring the wrong thing. Nora took the arrow. The shaft was heavier than the arrows she remembered from childhood, but well balanced. Crowfeather fletching. Moonsteel point. No visible warp. She rolled it once between her fingers. Straight enough. Voss watched the motion. You inspect arrows like an archer. My father hated crooked shafts. The words came out before she meant to offer them. Rowan's gaze sharpened. Nora turned away before he could ask more. She stepped on to the firing line. The gorge opened before her, enormous and pale beneath the winter sky. From here, the iron bell looked less like a target, and more like a dark mistake someone had left hanging at the edge of the world. 12 Royal Marksmen stood behind her. She could feel their judgment without turning around. Nora ignored them. She laid the arrow across the bow, but she did not draw. Instead, she waited. 5 seconds. 10. Voss shifted impatiently. What is she doing? Nora lifted one hand. Waiting. For what? The gorge. Someone laughed again. Rowan did not. Nora watched the frost near the edge of the platform. A thin ribbon of powder lifted, skittered east, then settled. She glanced at the pine line halfway across. Still wrong. Not yet. She picked up a dry pine needle from the stone and held it above the parapet. Voss exhaled through his nose. This is not kitchen superstition. Nora released the needle. It spun east, dropped, then caught something invisible and snapped hard toward the west. There, the reverse current had opened. A voice from years ago surfaced in her memory. Never shoot because someone is waiting. Her father's voice. Patient. Certain. Wait until the world gives you the shot. Nora planted her feet. The old stance came back more easily than she wanted it to. Left foot forward. Hips angled. Grip loose. She raised the moonsteel bow. Pain arrived immediately. A hot line through the old scar beneath her shoulder blade. She hit it. The bowstring came back slowly. Her body protested every inch. By half-draw, her left arm was trembling. Voss noticed. She can't hold it. Nora heard him. She kept drawing. The weight forced her to brace differently, turning slightly through her hips and letting her back take more of the load. An old border technique. Crude by Royal Guard standards, perhaps. Effective by hers. One of the older marksmen stopped breathing for a moment. He recognized it. Nora felt the wind touch her cheek. Not the ribbon. Not the platform. The gorge. She adjusted lower. Then slightly west. Her shoulder burned. For half a heartbeat, she almost released too early. No. Wait. The pines shifted. The river mist twisted. Now. She let go. The arrow vanished. There was no graceful line to follow. One instant it was there. The next it was swallowed by distance. Nora lowered the bow immediately. Pain ripped through her shoulder. She kept her face still. Everyone watched the gorge. Nothing. 1 second. Tfo. 3. Voss began to turn. Then the sound came. A clear iron clang from across Blackpine Gorge. The bell swung. No one spoke. The youngest marksman stared, as though the mountain itself had betrayed him. Another took 2 steps toward the parapet. Voss did not move at all. Nora placed the bow carefully on the firing table before her left arm could give away how badly it was shaking. A thin warmth spread beneath the back of her dress. The scar had opened. She pulled her cloak tighter. Too late. Rowan had seen it. He looked from her shoulder to the distant bell. Then back to her face. Who taught you that draw? Nora hesitated. There was no reason the name should matter anymore. The dead belonged to memory. Still, something in Rowan's tone told her this was not a casual question. My father. His name? Nora held the Alpha King's gaze. Elias Hale. The silence that followed was different from the others. Rowan's face changed. Barely. But enough. He knew the name. Nora felt cold move through her that had nothing to do with winter. You knew him? Rowan did not answer. Not there. Not in front of 12 marksmen and Commander Voss. He turned toward the stairway leading deeper into the castle. Come with me. Nora looked at the bow, then at the tray still waiting beside the stone ledge. For one irrational second, she wondered whether the kitchens would punish her for letting breakfast go cold. Then Rowan added, Leave the tray. He started toward the north tower. Nora followed, and with every step, one question grew louder than the pain in her shoulder. Why did the Alpha King know her father's name? The north tower stood apart from the rest of Blackridge Castle, connected to the main keep by a narrow stone passage that seemed designed to keep ordinary people out. Nora had delivered meals there before. She had never been allowed beyond the second landing. Today, Alpha King Rowan Blackridge took her all the way to the top. By the time they reached the final chamber, the ache in Nora's shoulder had settled into a deep, steady burn. She kept her cloak closed tightly over the blood staining the back of her dress, and refused to favor the injured arm. Rowan noticed anyway. You need a healer. I need an answer. He stopped beside the door. For a moment. Something almost like amusement touched his face. You always answer kings that way? I don't usually speak to kings. That explains it. He opened the door. The chamber beyond was nothing like the watch posts Nora knew. There were no beds, no food crates, no stacks of firewood. A long table filled the center of the room, covered with maps weighted by knives and pieces of iron. Narrow shelves held rolled military reports. Against the northern wall stood a brass viewing scope mounted before an open window. Nora walked toward it. Beyond the castle, Blackpine Valley stretched beneath the morning sky. The gorge where she had just made the shot looked smaller from this height. Farther north, beyond pine forests and a frozen river, another ridge rose dark against the horizon. Rowan came to stand beside her. Crowspire Ridge. Nora knew the name. Everyone along the northern border did. Lord Silas Crowe controlled the territory beyond it, officially in service to the crown and unofficially accountable to almost no one. Rowan adjusted the viewing scope. Look. Nora hesitated, then leaned toward the glass. The distant ridge snapped into focus. She saw pale stone, pine trees, and a narrow terrace cut into the mountainside. A fortified structure sat partly hidden behind the rock, almost invisible unless someone knew where to look. Beside it stood a tall iron beacon basket, blackened by years of signal fires. Nora pulled back. "What am I looking at?" "A command terrace." Rowan placed one finger on the map beside them. "Crowe appears there every morning shortly after sunrise. He receives reports from his border captains, sends orders to his riders, and sometimes uses that beacon to signal the northern posts." Nora looked toward the scope again. "How far?" "From this tower?" Rowan met her eyes. "Almost the same distance as the bell." The pain in Nora's shoulder seemed to disappear, not because it was gone, because suddenly there were more important things to feel. She looked at the map, then at Rowan. "The assessment?" "Yes. The bell wasn't a competition." "No." "You built the shot." Rowan said nothing. Nora understood anyway. Same distance. Same elevation difference. Same crosswind. Same northern exposure. The 12 Royal Marksmen had not been competing for pride. They had been proving whether something was possible. Nora stepped away from the scope. "You were testing whether someone could hit Crowe from here. I was testing whether the shot could be made. And now?" Rowan's expression remained controlled. "Now I know it can." A colder thought followed. "Because of me." "Yes." Nora folded her arms carefully. "If you brought me here to order me to kill a nobleman, I didn't." The answer came quickly enough to stop her. Rowan moved to the table. "I brought you here because you deserve to know what you walked into, before anyone asks anything of you." That was not the answer Nora had expected. She waited. Rowan unrolled another map. Red marks ran through the northern territories, following old mountain passes and frozen river crossings. For almost 7 years, Crowe has been moving contraband through the border. Moonbane, stolen weapons, military schedules, information about patrol routes. Nora's attention fixed on one of the lines. Why hasn't the Crown arrested him? Because Crowe does very little personally. He owns debts held by 3 members of the High Council, has relatives in 2 noble houses, and keeps enough distance between himself and every shipment that accusing him publicly without complete evidence would divide the kingdom before it convicted him. And sending soldiers? He would see them coming. Rowan pointed toward Crowspire Ridge. "There are 3 northern escape routes. By the time an army reached his fortress, he would be across the border." Nora looked at the beacon symbol marked beside the terrace. "So you remove him before he can run." That was one option. Was. The word bothered her. She looked closer at the map. Something else bothered her more. One of the red routes passed close to a place she had not spoken aloud in years. Red Hollow. Her breathing changed. Rowan noticed. Nora put one finger against the map. "Why is this route here?" He did not pretend not to understand. "Nora, why does Crowe's network pass through Red Hollow?" The room seemed to narrow around her. Red Hollow had once been a border garrison. Her father's garrison. She had been 10 when soldiers came to tell her it had fallen during a raid. A border attack. That was what everyone had called it. A tragedy too small to matter beyond the families who had lost someone. Nora lifted her eyes. "Silas Crowe." Rowan's silence answered first. She felt something old and buried open inside her. He destroyed Red Hollow. It was his operation. "My father died there." "I know." Nora stared at him. The words struck harder than the bowstring had. "You said you knew Elias Hale's name." Rowan held her gaze. "Yes." Nora's voice dropped. "He didn't die in a border raid." "No." Her hand tightened against the edge of the map. "My father died because he found something." This time, Rowan did not hesitate. "Yes." Nora did not speak for several seconds. The map beneath her hand seemed suddenly less like paper and more like a grave opened flat across the table. Red Hollow. She had spent 15 years believing the garrison had been destroyed because border settlements were fragile places and raids happened. That was what the official notice had said. That was what the castle records had said. A northern incursion. Heavy losses. No survivors confirmed among the scouting division. Atragede, random enough to mourn, small enough for the kingdom to forget. Rowan watched her carefully. What did he find? Nora's voice sounded distant even to herself. Weapons at first. Rowan said nothing, and that helped. She looked down at the routes drawn across the map. When I was little, my father used to turn everything into games. Routes, distances, landmarks. He said children remembered things better if adults stopped telling them they were lessons. A memory rose with painful clarity. Elias Hale crouched beside a kitchen table in a drafty border house, 3 black stones and a pine cone arranged between them. If the north road is blocked, what do? Take the river. And if the river freezes? Widow's Cut. And if you can't see the stars? She had rolled her eyes. Find the burned pines. He had smiled. Good girl. At 10 years old, she had believed he was teaching her how not to get lost. Now she understood he had been teaching her routes he could not safely write down. Nora looked back at Rowan. He started changing the games a few months before he died. Rowan leaned one hand against the table. How? More names. More places. Questions about which roads could carry wagons after snow. Which streams stayed deep enough for horses. Which valleys had line of sight to the watchfires. She pointed to one of the red marks on Rowan's map. He told me never to take this pass after the first hard freeze. Rowan followed her finger. Why? Because wagons moved through it at night. His expression sharpened. You remember that? I remember everything he made me repeat. Not everything. Not his last morning. She had tried for years to recover every detail of that day, and failed. She remembered the smell of wood smoke, his gloves drying beside the stove, his hand briefly resting on her hair, but not his final words before leaving. That absence had always felt cruel. Rowan moved to another stack of documents. When I became king, I ordered old border reports reviewed. 4 years ago, one of my investigators found 3 dispatches signed by Elias Hale. Nora looked up. You have his reports? Parts of them. Rowan opened a leather folder and placed several sheets on the table. The handwriting stopped Nora's breath. She knew it immediately. Narrow letters. Strong downward strokes. A habit of crossing every final line twice. Her father. For a moment, she could not touch the pages. Then she did. The paper was old and brittle beneath her fingertips. Elias Hale reported repeated shipments through Red Hollow territory. Moonbane. Weapons. Crates marked as grain that weighed like iron. He had identified 2 intermediaries and suspected a third. Then the report stopped. Nora reached the final page. Halfway down, the writing ended. Not because the page had torn, because an entire section had been removed. Someone had cut it away. Her eyes hardened. Who did this? We don't know. You've had this for 4 years. Yes. And no one found the missing section? No. Anger rose quickly. Then whoever removed it succeeded. Rowan accepted the accusation without flinching. For a long time. Nora looked back at the route map. Her father's games. Burned pines. Frozen river. Night wagons. A name surfaced. So ordinary that she had never questioned it. Widow's Pass. Rowan went still. What? My father called one route Widow's Pass. He scanned the map. There is no pass by that name. There was to him. She moved around the table and traced the northern mountains with one finger. 3 burned pines. A split ridge. A narrow cut where snow gathers late because the eastern wall blocks the sun. Rowan pulled another map closer. Here? No. Toe open. She studied it. Then another. Nothing. Nora closed her eyes. She was 10 again. Elias moving the stones. 3 pines. Frozen Creek. Turn where the wolf-shaped rock faces south. Her eyes opened. This. She pointed to an unlabeled ravine between Crowspire territory and the old Red Hollow line. Rovanstadet. That's not marked as navigable. It is in winter. How do you know? My father made me walk it. The room changed. Rowan crossed to the door and called for a guard. "Bring Captain Mercer from intelligence. Now." Nora looked at him. "You believe me that easily?" "I believe that 12 trained marksmen ignored what you saw this morning, because they assumed their map of the wind was complete." He glanced down at the unmarked ravine. "I'm not making the same mistake twice." That answer struck somewhere she was not prepared to examine. Nora looked again at her father's handwriting. "If I help you, I want terms." Rowan turned back. "Name them." "Formal crown protection." "Written. Not implied." "Agreed. Access to anything connected to my father's investigation." "Within security limits?" "Yes." "No." He raised an eyebrow. "If you want my memory, you don't get to decide which pieces of the truth I'm allowed to see." A beat passed. "Agreed. And if I refuse the shot later, nothing changes. I keep the protection. I keep access to the truth about Red Hollow." Rowan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You're negotiating with the king before agreeing to save his operation." "I'm negotiating because I learned what happens to people who trust powerful men to remember promises." Something moved in Rowan's face. Not offense. Recognition. "You negotiate better than half my council." Nora looked down at the missing section cut from Elias Hale's report. "Half your council has probably never had to negotiate for the right to survive." Rowan's reply came quietly. "Fair." Bootsteps sounded on the tower stairs. Someone was coming. Nora kept her hand on her father's report. For the first time in 15 years, Elias Hale was no longer only a dead man in her memory. He was evidence. And somewhere beyond the castle walls, the road he had died trying to expose might still be open. Captain Mercer arrived at the North Tower with 2 intelligence officers, and the expression of a man who had been pulled away from something important and intended to resent whoever caused it. That expression lasted until Rowan showed him the ravine Nora had identified. Mercer leaned over the map. "Widow's Pass?" "That's what Elias Hale called it," Nora said. Mercer glanced at her, then back at the map. "This cut was surveyed 11 years ago. Too narrow for wagons. In summer." He looked up. Nora pointed to the stream running through the ravine. "The water drops after the first hard freeze. Once the bed freezes solid, you gain another 6 or 7 feet of width." Mercer studied the contour lines. "How many wagons?" "My father used to ask how many I thought could pass before sunrise." Nora searched the memory. 4 if they kept distance. 6 if they didn't care about tracks. Mercer stopped looking skeptical. Within an hour, Nora found herself somewhere no tower runner was supposed to be. The king's war room. The long oak table was already crowded when she entered. Commander Voss stood near the northern map with 3 border officers. 2 council lords occupied the opposite end. Captain Mercer had spread Elias Hale's recovered reports beside a stack of recent intelligence records, and Nora, still wearing the same plain gray dress from that morning, was given a chair halfway down the table. Not at the end, halfway, she noticed. So did everyone else. Lord Barrett, a broad man with silver hair and a gold council chain, looked from Nora to Rowan. "My king, perhaps the servant should wait outside while we discuss military movement." "Nora stays." Barrett's mouth tightened. Voss said nothing. That was almost worse. Mercer began with the recent disappearances. 3 patrols had vanished during the past 14 months near Crowspire territory. No bodies, no horses, no confirmed enemy contact. Nora studied the locations marked in charcoal. 1 sat directly north of the ravine, another west. The 3rd appeared unrelated. She leaned closer. Where was this patrol going? 1 border captain answered. "Stonebridge? They wouldn't have taken that road." The captain frowned. "It's the fastest route. Not after heavy snow. It was January." "Exactly." Several men looked at her. Nora pointed toward a narrow ridge. "The north face ice is first. Horses avoid it, unless they're forced. Anyone who knew the area would cut southeast here." Lord Barrett gave a dry laugh. We are restructuring 12 months of military intelligence based on childhood games now? Nora turned toward him. No. She touched 3 marks on the map. I'm asking why your 3 missing patrols disappear around the same unmarked corridor. The room quieted. Barrett's expression changed. Mercer pulled a leather ledger toward him and flipped through several pages. First Patrol's final check-in was North Hollow. He opened another report. Second was 6 miles east of the same ridge. A third. His eyes narrowed. The third was officially listed near Stonebridge, but their supply request was collected at Red Creek the night before. Nora knew Red Creek. It fed directly into Widow's Pass. Mercer looked at Rowan. She's right. No one laughed after that. The meeting shifted. Maps were replaced with shipment records. Recent seizures from suspected smugglers were brought in from the evidence room. Arrowheads, leather sacks, broken crate seals, and a blackened strip of timber. Nora picked up one of the crate fragments. A sharp smell clung to it. Pine. Smoke. Something bitter underneath. Her thumb brushed the dark coating along the wood grain. Black resin. Mercer nodded. Waterproofing compound. We found it on 4 confiscated shipments. My father knew it. How? He hated the smell. The memory returned unexpectedly. Elias coming through their door after midnight, stripping his gloves off and tossing them beside the stove. That damned black pitch again. At 10, Nora had thought he was complaining about dirty work. Now she understood. He said traders from Crowspire used it because it stayed flexible in freezing weather. Mercer stared at the timber. That detail was never in his surviving reports. It must have been in the section someone removed. Rowan stood at the head of the table, listening. Nora saw the moment the pattern became larger than her father. Widow's Pass was still being used. The same waterproofing compound had appeared on modern shipments, and someone had known exactly which section of Elias Hale's report needed to disappear. Mercer voiced the conclusion first. If Crowe's network has survived this long, he has help inside the kingdom. Inside the kingdom? Barrett asked. Mercer shook his head. Closer. His gaze moved around the room. Someone with access to military archives. The silence became colder. When the council finally broke, the sun had already moved high above the eastern ridge. Nora was gathering Elias's reports when Rowan approached. You'll return to your normal duties tomorrow. She looked at him. Excuse me? If Crowe has an informant here, the safest thing is for no one to know your role has changed. You continue your tower route. Same clothes. Same schedule. Mercer contacts you privately. The logic was obvious. That did not make it feel better. So, the safest version of me is still the invisible one. Rowan's expression tightened. That isn't what I meant. It's what you asked for. I'm trying to keep attention away from you. Nora tucked the reports carefully into their folder. I spent 6 years learning how to disappear because people in this castle found that convenient. This is different. Is it? He had no immediate answer. For the first time since that morning, Nora saw the limit of Rowan's willingness to listen. Not cruelty. Not contempt. Control. He had decided what was safest, and expected the decision itself to be enough. Nora lifted the folder. I'll follow the plan. Then she added quietly, that doesn't mean I agree with it. She left before he could respond. Far north, beyond Blackpine Gorge, a rider reached Crowspire after nightfall. Lord Silas Crowe broke the seal on the message. Beside a low fire, he read the first line once, then again. Elias Hale had a daughter. Silas's expression did not change. He continued, she is inside the king's castle. For the first time in 15 years, the name Hale became dangerous again. Silas Crowe did not order Nora Hale killed. The man standing across from his desk seemed surprised by that. She can make the shot, the messenger said. If the report is accurate. Silas folded the message once and placed it beside the fire. Then, killing her would be stupid. My lord? If she dies inside Blackridge Castle, 2 days after the king notices her, Rowan will tear apart every corridor, Looking for the hand that reached her, Silas poured himself a glass of wine. Men become predictable when someone gives them an enemy. He looked toward the dark window, overlooking Crowspire Ridge. So don't give him one. What do you want done? Silas smiled without warmth. Make him doubt her. By the following afternoon, Nora was carrying trays again. The castle had not changed. The same servants hurried through the same passages. The same cooks shouted over boiling pots. The same guards barely looked at her when she crossed checkpoints carrying bread or medicine. Only Nora had changed. Every corridor now contained possibilities she had never considered before. Someone inside Blackridge had removed part of her father's report. Someone still had access to military information. And somewhere beyond the northern mountains, Silas Crowe knew far more than the Crown wanted him to know. Nora delivered lunch to Eastwatch and was returning through the lower gallery when Captain Mercer found her. He did not greet her. Come with me. Something in his face made her put down the empty tray without argument. He led her to a small records chamber adjoining the war room. Rowan was already there. So vas commanda vos. On the table lay an old leather ledger. Nora stopped. What is that? Mercer answered carefully. It was found this morning in a sealed storage chest from Red Hollow. Her eyes went to Rowan. And? No one spoke quickly enough. Nora walked to the table. The ledger had been opened to a page marked with a strip of red cloth. She read the first line, then the second. Her hands went cold. Elias Hale payment received. Below it were dates, amounts, shipment references. The same months her father had been investigating the smuggling route. Nora stared at the handwriting beside the entries. It looked like his. Not similar. His. The narrow letters. The heavy downward strokes. Even the double line beneath the final notation. For several seconds, she forgot there were other people in the room. No. Mercer said nothing. Voss folded his arms. The ledger suggests Elias Hale may have been taking payment from the network he claimed to be investigating. Nora looked at him. You think he was working for Crowe? I think we have evidence that has to be examined. He died because of Crowe. That is what we believed. Nora hated the word believed. She looked back at the page. Her father had taught her not to trust paper because paper could burn. He had never told her paper could lie in his own handwriting. A memory surfaced. Elias returning home late, angry, black resin on his gloves. Another. Him warning her never to repeat certain route names outside their house. Had he been protecting an investigation? Or protecting himself? Nora stepped away from the table. Rowan finally spoke. I don't believe this settles anything. Voss turned. My king. I said anything. Rowan looked at Nora. We verify the ledger before we decide what it means. The words should have helped. They did not, because for the first time in 15 years, Nora was no longer certain what her father had died for. The High Council heard about the ledger before sunset. By evening, 3 council members were demanding Nora be removed from the Crowe investigation. One called her testimony compromised. Another suggested she had invented Widow's Pass to direct Crown forces away from something the Hale family wanted hidden. By nightfall, someone had used the word traitor. Rowan responded by placing Nora under guard. She learned about the order when 2 royal guards appeared outside the chamber she had been assigned near the western wing. You're not permitted to leave without escort, one told her. Nora stared at him. Whose order? Neither guard answered. They did not need to. Rowan arrived 20 minutes later. Nora was waiting. You promised me protection, she said. This is protection. No, this is confinement. Until Mercer verifies the ledger and we identify whoever leaked it to the council, you are safer here. Savage. Yes. She glanced at the closed door behind him. A locked door doesn't become protection because a king chooses the lock. His jaw tightened. There may be someone inside this castle working for Crowe. Then find them. I intend to. While I sit here. While you stay alive. Nora stepped closer. You decided again. Rowan's expression shifted. This is not the same as asking you to remain invisible. It feels exactly the same from this side of the door." He had no answer that satisfied either of them. Nora turned away. "Go run your kingdom." He stood there another moment, then left. An hour later, the royal wolf came. Rook moved down the corridor without sound despite his size, silver-gray fur catching the torchlight. One of the guards stiffened as the wolf approached. Rook ignored him. He stopped outside Nora's door and lay down. Nora watched through the narrow opening. "Planning to guard me too?" One large ear moved. That was all. Later, near midnight, another guard appeared carrying a covered meal. Nora did not recognize him. Rook did. The wolf rose instantly. No growl. No attack. He simply stepped between the man and the door. The guard stopped. "It's her supper." Rook did not move. Nora studied the man. New boots. Royal insignia. Gloves, despite being indoors. Then she smelled it. Bitter pine. Smoke. Black resin. Her pulse changed. "Put the tray down." The guard hesitated. Rook took one step forward. The man dropped the tray and backed away. Nora waited until he disappeared around the corridor. Then she looked at the guards Rowan had originally assigned. "Get Captain Mercer." One started to argue. "Now." This time, her voice made him move. Nora entered her chamber and went straight to the equipment case Mercer had delivered earlier that evening. Inside were 6 practice arrows prepared for the next morning. She lifted the first. Something felt wrong. The feathers were perfect. Too perfect. Nora rotated the shaft between her fingers. Then she saw it. The fletching angle had been changed. Barely. Enough to alter the arrow's drift at long range. She checked the second. Sama. Third. Sama. All 6. Nora stared at them. The ledger. The guard. The arrows. Silas Crowe was not trying to kill her. Not yet. He wanted her alive long enough to fail. And when she missed, the entire kingdom would believe the daughter of Elias Hale had been a fraud from the beginning. Captain Mercer arrived before dawn, with 2 intelligence officers and a face that had lost all trace of sleep. The false guard was gone. By the time Mercer's men searched the western corridor, they found only the abandoned tray, a discarded Royal Guard cloak, and a pair of gloves rubbed with black resin. Whoever had worn them knew the castle well enough to disappear before the alarm spread. Mercer examined the altered arrows beneath a lamp. This would have been almost impossible to notice at a glance. That was the point, Nora said. At short distance, they'd still fly well enough. Across the gorge, they'd drift. How far? Far enough for everyone watching to believe I was the problem. Mercer looked toward the closed door. The ledger destroys your father. The arrows destroy you. Same strategy. Make the Hale name unreliable. Nora nodded. A knock sounded. Rowan entered alone. Nora's expression hardened immediately. Mercer gathered the arrows. "I'll give you the room." "No," Nora said. Mercer stopped. She looked at Rowan. "If he wants to discuss the investigation, you stay." Rowan understood what she was doing. This time, he did not challenge it. "Stay, Captain." Mercer remained. Nora folded her arms. "You locked me in a room because someone might come after me." "Yes, someone came anyway." Rowan glanced toward the abandoned tray outside. "I know. You can put guards around every door in this castle and still miss the person standing inside the walls. I know that too. Then stop treating me like something you can secure by moving me from one box to another." Rowan's jaw tightened, but not with anger. "I was trying to keep you alive. You were trying to control every variable." His eyes stayed on hers. "I'm not a variable." The words landed harder than Nora intended. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Rowan nodded. "You're right." Nora had prepared herself for an argument. The absence of one left her almost more unsettled. Rowan turned to Mercer. "Cancel the confinement order." Mercer blinked. "My king? Now. If there is an active threat." "There is." "Which means keeping her isolated makes her easier to control, not safer." He looked back at Nora. You keep your crown protection. You move freely. Any guard assigned to you answers to Mercer, not Commander Voss, until we know where the breach is. Nora studied him. That's the beginning. I know. Rowan faced Mercer again. Bring the ledger to the war room. Nora sees everything connected to it. Mercer nodded once. Within an hour, the same council members who had demanded Nora's removal were seated around the war table, while the forged ledger lay open before them. Nora stood rather than sat. She had spent half the walk there, wondering whether she wanted to look at her father's handwriting again. She did. This time, she looked past the shock, past the familiar downward strokes, past the doubled lines. She read the entries slowly. Something bothered her. Not the numbers, not the names. The directions. One payment note referenced a shipment moving north through Red Hollow. Her father had written the word north, exactly as she remembered. Except, he had not. Nora leaned closer. Mercer. He came beside her. What? Bring me one of Elias Hale's original reports. Mercer opened the archive folder. Nora placed the real page beside the ledger. There. No one understood. Rowan did. His attention narrowed. The symbol. Elias had never written a standard N when recording field directions. He used an old border scout mark, a vertical stroke crossed by a small angled slash. The ledger used the modern military abbreviation. Nora felt something in her chest release. My father didn't write this. Mercer examined the rest. The handwriting was copied from his archived reports, Nora said, which meant the forger had access to those reports. That narrowed the list. By midday, Mercer had one name: Deputy Quartermaster Hollis. He controlled archive transfers, arrow supplies, winter resin contracts, and temporary guard equipment. He lasted 12 minutes under questioning before confessing. Silas Crowe had bought his gambling debts 3 years earlier. Since then, Hollis had supplied patrol schedules, archive copies, armory inventories, and small changes no one noticed because small changes were rarely investigated. The ledger, the arrows, the false guard, all of it led through him. But the worst information came last. He knows about the shot, Mercer said that afternoon. The war room went silent. Nora looked up. How? Hollis sent the North Tower schedule 3 days ago. Commander Voss swore under his breath. Rowan moved to the Crowspire map. Then Crowe won't stand on the terrace. Mercer shook his head. He plans to. That made everyone look at him. Mercer placed a captured message on the table. He's changed the purpose of tomorrow morning. Rowan read it once. His face hardened. What? Nora stepped closer. Mercer pointed toward the beacon symbol beside Crowspire Terrace. Crowe has troops hidden north of Widow's Pass. More than 200, possibly 3. At sunrise tomorrow, he lights the beacon. Nora understood. Before Mercer finished, that's the signal for the border attack. The room changed instantly. This was no longer about one nobleman. 3 settlements lay south of Widow's Pass. Families, children, watch posts no larger than Red Hollow had once been. Rowan looked at Nora. The mission changes. Commander Voss spoke first. We move riders tonight. We already are, Rowan said. But they won't reach every settlement before sunrise. Nora stared at the beacon marked on the map. All morning she had thought Silas Crowe wanted her to miss him. Now she understood. He wanted the king focused on a man, while an invasion began somewhere else. Rowan came closer. You don't owe me this. Nora looked at him. If you say no, I find another way. Do you have one? He did not answer. That was answer enough. Nora looked again at Widow's Pass, at Red Hollow, at every small border home that believed someone farther south would notice if danger came. Her father had once believed the same thing. She touched the edge of the map. I'm not doing it for you. I know. I'm not doing it for revenge. Rowan said nothing. Nora looked toward the dark line, representing Crowspire Ridge. I'm doing it because there are people out there who have no idea someone has decided their lives are expendable. She lifted her eyes. Show me the beacon. The beacon was harder to reach than Silas Crowe. Nora understood that within 10 minutes of returning to the North Tower, the military maps showed the terrace clearly enough. But maps flattened everything that mattered. Through the brass scope, Crowspire Ridge became a wall of pale stone and dark pine, with the beacon basket positioned behind a waist-high iron barrier. At sunrise, a signal keeper would only need a few seconds to ignite it. Commander Voss stood beside the window. If Crowe appears, we take him. Nora did not look away from the scope. And if the beacon lights while everyone is watching him? Voss said nothing. That was the problem now. Silas had spent years making himself the obvious target. The real weapon was the signal. Nora stepped away from the scope. I need the bow. The armory master brought the moonsteel warbow she had used the previous morning. Nora took it by the grip. Something felt wrong immediately. She flexed the upper limb once. A faint crack answered. Her head snapped up. Don't touch it. The armory master froze. Nora turned the bow toward the light. A hairline cut ran beneath the moonsteel reinforcement, almost invisible. Deliberate. If she had drawn to full tension, the limb could have split in her hands. Voss cursed. Rowan's expression went cold. Hollis? Probably, Mercer said. Or someone he paid before we arrested him. Nora laid the weapon down carefully. What else do we have? The armory master hesitated. One older Moansteel bow. He brought it from a locked case. Nora knew immediately why no one had offered it before. It was longer, heavier. The leather grip had been shaped for a much larger hand. She lifted it. Her left shoulder protested before she even drew. Voss shook his head. She can't use that. Nora glanced at him. I can use it. That isn't the same as making the shot. No. At least they finally agreed on something. The next 2 hours were ugly. Nora's first practice arrow struck low. The second drifted left. The third clipped the outside edge of a distance plate and disappeared into the gorge. Voss watched without comment. That somehow irritated her more than criticism would have. Nora lowered the bow. Her shoulder burned. She wanted the old weapon back. The familiar release. The balance she had already learned. But her father's voice returned instead. A weapon doesn't owe you familiarity. Listen to what it does, not what you want it to do. Nora closed her eyes. Then she stopped fighting the bow. Its release pulled left. Fine. Its draw weight forced her higher through the back. Fine. The grip twisted slightly when she anchored. Fine. Every weapon had a language. She only had to stop insisting it speak hers. The fourth arrow struck center. Not perfectly. Enough. Rowan had remained at the back of the tower the entire time. Silent. Nora noticed that too. Hours earlier, his presence would have felt like pressure. Now it did not. She lowered the bow. If we survive tomorrow, Rowan said, what do you want? Nora looked at him. That's an unusual question before a military operation. Answer it anyway. She thought of the kitchens. The towers. Years spent carrying other people's messages into rooms where no one wanted hers. A room. Rowan frowned slightly. A room? With a desk. Maps, reports. A door I can close because I choose to, not because someone ordered me inside. His expression softened. That's a very small request. Nora looked toward Crowspire Ridge. It never was. By evening, the weather shifted. Mercer returned with one final reconnaissance report. Silas had added an iron windscreen around the beacon platform. Voss spread the sketch on the table. Nora stared at it. 3 reinforced panels. Champ. Support braces. Almost no clean line to the beacon. He knows where the shot is coming from, Mercer said. Rowan looked at Nora. The original plan was gone. Nora walked back to the scope. Night was falling over Crowspire, but she could still make out the dark shape of the new barrier. Direct shot impossible, at least from the angle everyone else was considering. Nora watched the chain sway. Once. Twice. Then she looked at the pine branches below them. The wind was already speaking. She only needed until morning to understand what it was saying. Nora reached the north tower before sunrise. The castle below was still dark, But Crowspire Ridge had begun to separate from the sky in layers of gray stone and black pine. Rowan stood near the back wall with Rook beside him. Commander Voss watched through a second scope. No one spoke. Nora preferred it that way. She set 3 arrows beside the window. Only 3. Her shoulder would not give her more. Through the scope, the iron windscreen surrounding the beacon platform looked even worse than it had in Mercer's sketch. 3 heavy panels blocked the direct line from Blackridge. Chains ran from the upper frame to iron supports anchored into the stone. Behind them, barely visible, stood the beacon basket. Voss lowered his scope. No shot. Nora did not answer. A figure stepped onto the terrace. Silas Crowe. Even at that distance, he carried himself like a man who believed the mountain belonged to him. 2 guards followed. Then a signal keeper carrying a covered flame. Voss swore quietly. We're out of time. Nora watched the smoke rising from a brazier near the terrace. It bent east, then upward, then sharply west. The same layered wind she had seen on the firing platform days earlier. Only now there was something else. The chains. One of them tightened each time the crosswind struck the southern face of the screen. The panel resisted, then shifted back. Not much. Enough. Nora picked up the old moonsteel bow. Rowan stepped forward once. Your shoulder. I know. If you can't, I know. He stopped. That mattered. Nora raised the bow. She did not aim at Silas. She aimed below him. Voss saw the direction. That's not the beacon. No. Nora. Let her work. Rowan's voice ended the argument. Nora. Dref. Pain spread through her shoulder immediately. She ignored it. The support pin beneath the central chain was smaller than the bell she had struck during the test. Smaller than anything she had ever attempted at this distance. But the pin itself was not the real target. The wind was. She waited. The southern panel trembled. The chain pulled tight. Now. Nora released. The arrow crossed the gorge and disappeared. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Voss leaned toward the scope. You missed. Nora kept watching. Across the ridge, the arrow had struck stone just below the chain. Silas turned toward the sound. Then the crosswind hit. The damaged support pin tore free. The chain snapped sideways. The central windscreen swung open with enough force to slam against the outer frame. For the first time, the beacon stood exposed. Voss read. You didn't miss. No. On Crowspire Ridge. Silas understood. Even through the scope, Nora saw his head turn toward Blackridge Castle. Toward her. He shouted something. The signal keeper uncovered the flame. Nora reached for the second arrow. Her shoulder nearly failed before she could raise the bow. Rowan moved, then stopped himself. Nora noticed. He trusted her enough not to take the choice away. She drew again. The signal keeper ran toward the beacon. Silas pointed at the tower. A guard lifted a shield. Nora's sightline disappeared. She could not hit the keeper, could not hit Silas, could barely see the beacon. Then she saw the ceramic oil conduit feeding the basket from a storage vessel behind the platform. One narrow section remained exposed beneath the railing. Her father's voice came back to her. Protect the border. Not kill the man. Protect the border. Nora shifted her aim. The pain became white. Her fingers began to slip. She released. The arrow struck the ceramic line. It shattered. Oil spilled across the lower stone instead of feeding the beacon. The signal keeper threw the flame. Fire burst across the terrace floor, but the beacon did not light. No signal rose above Crowspire. No hidden army received the order to advance. For several seconds, no one in the north tower moved. Then Voss exhaled. Signal failed. Below them, Blackridge riders were already moving through Widow's Pass. Mercer's forces had been waiting for exactly that moment. Through the scope, Nora watched Silas retreat from the terrace as his own soldiers turned in confusion. He was not dead. Nora realized she was glad. Let him stand before the council. Let him hear Elias Hale's name spoken aloud. Let him watch everything he had buried become public. Her bow slipped from her hand. Rowan caught it before it struck the floor. Nora looked once more toward Crowspire Ridge. The windscreen hung broken. The beacon remained dark. She closed her eyes. "You were right, Dad," she whispered. The wind had never lied. Only people had. Silas Crowe was captured before noon. Blackridge riders closed Widow's Pass from the south, while Mercer's men cut off the northern road. By the time Crowe understood the beacon had failed, the routes he had spent years protecting were already being used against him. He was brought to Blackridge Castle in chains 2 days later. Nora did not go to the courtyard to watch. She was in the records chamber with Captain Mercer when they opened the first crate seized from Crowspire. Inside were ledgers, real ones, shipment dates, payments, names, patrol schedules, council debts, and beneath 3 years of newer records. Mercer found a thin folder marked with the crest of Red Hollow. Nora knew what it was before he opened it. The missing pages from Elias Hale's reports. Her father had been telling the truth. All of it. The forged ledger was exposed within a week. Deputy Quartermaster Hollis confessed to copying Elias's handwriting from archived reports, and Crowe's own records proved that Red Hollow had not fallen in a random border raid. It had been destroyed, deliberately. Elias Hale had found the network. Silas Crowe had ordered the garrison silenced. 15 years after Nora had been told her father died in an unfortunate border attack, his name was read aloud before the High Council. Elias Hale, border scout and royal archer, killed in service to the crown after identifying the Crowspire smuggling network. Nora stood at the back of the council chamber when Rowan read the decree. She had carried trays through that room before. No one had ever noticed. Now every person inside knew her name. Rowan did more than clear Elias's record. Border funding was restored to settlements Crowe had weakened through bribery and false reports. A new civilian intelligence channel was created, so servants, traders, scouts, farmers, and other unranked citizens could report threats directly without needing a noble sponsor. Commander Voss objected to parts of it. Then, after a long argument, helped design the system anyway. Nora respected him slightly more for that. A month after Crowe's arrest, Rowan called her to the North Tower. There was no war council waiting. Only a desk, maps, reports, and a brass plate resting on the wood. Nora Hale, Royal Range Master. Border Intelligence Liaison. She stared at it. "You said you wanted a room," Rowan said. Nora looked around. "This is more than a room." "Yes. You're getting better at listening. I've had an irritating teacher." She almost smiled. Then she noticed something beside the brass plate, a worn leather finger guard. Her breath caught. Mercer had found it among Red Hollow's preserved effects. Her father's initials were pressed faintly into the leather. E. Huh. Nora picked it up carefully. For years, every remaining piece of Elias Hale had existed only in memory. Now she had his reports, his name restored, and something his hands had actually touched. She placed the finger guard inside the top drawer of her desk. Not hidden in a boat, not buried in an apron pocket. Somewhere safe. Rowan watched her close the drawer. Then he asked quietly, "Will you stay?" Nora looked at him. "In the castle? In whatever part of my life you choose. No command, no claim, no mention of fate. Just a question." Nora stepped closer and placed her hand in his. "Ask me again when I'm standing somewhere I chose for myself." Rowan glanced around the room. "I thought this was that place." Nora finally smiled. It might be. Months later, the North Range looked different. The firing line no longer belonged only to Alpha soldiers. Young scouts trained beside Betas. 2 Omega women stood among them. A former stable hand was learning distance reading. A kitchen boy with excellent eyesight had been recruited to spotting work after Nora caught him correcting a guard's range estimate. A young Omega at the line released an arrow. It missed. She immediately lowered her head. "Sorry." Nora stepped beside her. "Don't apologize." The girl looked confused. Nora pointed toward the gorge. What did the wind tell you? The Omega looked again. Really looked. At the river mist. At the pines. At the frost moving across the stone. Behind them, Rowan stood near the tower arch with Rook at his side. He did not interrupt. He did not need to. Nora turned back to her student. Once, Blackridge had believed Nora Hale was only a servant carrying other people's messages through rooms where she did not belong. The kingdom had not discovered her that morning on the firing platform. It had simply stopped overlooking her. And now Nora intended to make sure it learned how many others it had failed to see.